I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's episode, we'll cover the Horns and the Sooners to the SEC. Eli Drinkwitz takes a shot at Dan Mullen. The SEC East picks are in at media days, and a little NIL chatter. Just some things we heard from the different media days this past week. But first off, Will, how's it going, man? A lot to talk about this week.
Yeah, it's going great. We've been struggling for some topics a few weeks this year, but you texted me like Wednesday or Thursday last week. Or like, we got plenty to talk about. There's plenty to talk about. So it's good. The season's getting closer and closer, and we're going to have lots to talk about through the season. So just thank you to everybody who's been watching. Thank you for subscribing. We're at 875. We need to get to 1,000 before the season so we can monetize the channel. So if you're on the edge, please give us a chance. Go ahead and subscribe. And then at the end of this episode, we're going to have a 4 or 5 minute segment of some of the stuff that you can get if you sign up on Patreon to our Patreon channel. So make sure if you stay all the way through, listen to that at the end. You can sort of get a taste and maybe go over there and support us there as well.
Especially as we enter into August. Football season is right around the corner, and again, plenty to talk about. But let's jump into two bits here. Texas and Oklahoma made waves this week. News broke during SEC media days that the Horns and the Sooners were talking about leaving the Big 12. It wasn't official yet, but as of today, on Monday here, they put in word to notify the conference that we will be leaving at the end of our term. I believe it's in 2024, Will, but there's talks that it might happen sooner. Now, there's no guarantee that they're coming to the SEC, but from all indications that you read around everywhere, it seems like it is the SEC. But it launched an entire week of chaos. I mean, I think I saw a headline about Oregon's talking to the Big Ten. Like, we're all over the place now. So anarchy is about to ensue in college football. If NIL wasn't enough to keep you interested, get ready for round 2 of realignment in the last decade here. It's about to get real heated real fast.
Well, let's be honest. Texas and Oklahoma aren't the ones who started this fiasco. That was Texas A&M, who definitely is the program that leaked this stuff, and then got to save face over the week where they're like, of course the SEC didn't negotiate this behind our back without letting us know. Sure, guys. Yeah, that's what happened there. So A&M finds out, leaks it because they want to make it stop, and then it turns out there's no stop. And once Sankey decides that that's what he wants, especially with the way college football is changing, then you knew that Texas and Oklahoma were going to be coming. It's an interesting addition to the SEC. Certainly, they already have the A&M market. So is the Texas market or the OU market? I mean, it's more of a branding thing, right? Saying, hey, we're going to make sure we have the best programs in the country within the SEC. And you suspect that, 16 is interesting, but based on the way the playoff has been described thus far, it's going to be curious to see whether they expand even further or whether they stick with the 16 and maybe you get a couple of two, maybe the Big 10 then sort of goes out and forms its own 16-team league. And then you've basically got those two conferences duking it out. 32 would be just like the NFL, man. So Big 10, build up to 16, go against the SEC, kick all those guys on the West Coast out.
Oh, that's the way it's been anyway in the playoff the last 3 years, hasn't it? I do think that this is I was not expecting this right away. For Texas and OU to be, you figure that would have been the case if maybe there were some movement in the Big 12 that you were seeing, but for them to fire the first shot, and I agree, I agree with you. I'm on the A&M probably leaked it train too. Just to
not probably they did
100%. I'm with you on that one, but I think for A&M, you see how that was actually the first thing I thought of when I saw the news was there's no way A&M's going to improve it because I think there was talks between Florida State and the SEC back in the day. They were independent until the early 90s there when they joined the ACC, and I'm fairly certain that we had something to do with them not coming in. The University of Florida had something to do with FSU not coming into the SEC, and for A&M to be completely left out of the discussions, that's a move by Sankey right there.
Oh, yeah. Well, so there's two things. First, this almost happened, what was it, a decade ago? When A&M and Mizzou came into the SEC, Texas and Oklahoma were really flirting with breaking up the Big 12.
Right.
It's one of the reasons why Well, that too. That's
Right.
one of the reasons that you saw Nebraska move to the Big Ten. It's one of the reasons you saw Colorado go to the Pac-12, and Texas wanted to almost be like its own independent entity and run the Big 12, and that's kind of what they've been able to do, right? I mean, Oklahoma's wanted a lot more than Texas, but Texas has the Longhorn
The
Network.
power base.
And at the end of the day, they looked at the way things were moving. So here's the deal, and this is one of my biggest concerns with the NIL and even with the Supreme Court ruling against the NCAA that's sort of opening this up to be even more business-like than it was before, is that players have a 4-year window to negotiate. Universities have an unlimited window to negotiate. And so if you start treating this like in the NFL, where you have unions and you have collective bargaining and those sorts of things, the universities are going to win, just like the owners win in the NFL because guys have short careers, right? So the guy who has a 3 or 4 year career in the NFL is worried about maximizing his dollars now. He's not worried about some guy 15, 16 years from now
Right.
and how he's going to do. Whereas the owner is saying, I'm going to own this team for the next 30 years and I'm going to then bequeath it to my son when I die. And it's going to be in Jerry Jones's family for Lord knows how long. Right. So that is what is going on here, is that these guys are figuring out that now that the NCAA, they basically kicked the NCAA to the curb. Mark Emmert was like, yeah, I think we need to deregulate the NCAA like a day before the SEC media days. Not a coincidence. I'm pretty sure that if he hadn't said it, that Sankey would have said it as SEC media days. Sankey has not been he's not been hiding the ball when it comes to whether he's pleased with the way the NCAA does things. And the SEC basically said, we don't need you anymore. And part of not needing you anymore is building this super conference that nobody's going to be able to argue with. Basically, the SEC is going to run college football from now on. That's what this move really means. And then the question is, who's going to go with them? And then who's going to partner with them when it comes to having big time college football?
Well, the part about Texas that gets me is when you talk about the weakening of the Big 12, you got to blame Texas of all people. One of the big reasons Nebraska got ticked off and went to the Big 10 was because Texas was trying to drive too much. They wanted too much power, and it was driving the folks in Lincoln crazy. And you get a sweet offer from the Big 10. I'm sure those things combined at some point to push the lever toward the Big 10. But with Texas, you got the Longhorn Network. Who's it run by? The SEC. Who just won the CBS contract? CBS didn't win the contract for that Saturday afternoon game anymore. It's going to ESPN. So you're with ESPN, Disney, that whole conglomerate. It is taking over the SEC entirely, and probably facilitated some of those negotiations behind closed doors, I'm sure. And with the little Longhorn Network, that's going to be no problem to get out of. I don't think they've had a ton of success with that, Will. Do you know much about the Longhorn Network?
I mean, I've never spent 1 minute watching the Longhorn Network, but I'm also not a Longhorn fan, right? If there was a Gator Network that was 24 hours, as long as they didn't show the LSU game from last year, I would probably watch that whenever it was on TV. So, but again, I'm a psychotic fan as opposed to maybe some other people who are more casual. So it sort of depends. But no, I mean, the Longhorn Network, it's not
been a raging success is the point.
Well, and if you think about it, like when Alabama has success, you hear the chants of SEC. When Auburn has success, you hear the chants of SEC. There is a brotherhood amongst these schools in the Southeast that, there's an understanding that we own college football, both from a championship perspective, but also from a professional perspective and really from a bowl perspective, all those sorts of things, right? Like, yeah, Ohio State will win a title every once in a while. Clemson will win a title every once in a while. But you go back and look at the last 20 years of college football, and the majority of the champions are from the SEC, and it's not just Alabama. And so there's this brotherhood within the SEC of all these people who have sort of joined together. Texas, because they tried to go it alone and because they haven't been very good, means that there just hasn't been the ability to drive the numbers and drive the revenue that they thought they would get, I think. Now, if Texas had started the Longhorn Network like 2 years before Mac Brown took over, and all of a sudden they're winning national championships with Vince Young competing with Colt McCoy, I think it's maybe a different story. But the reality is you go 8-5 with Tom Herman, and nobody watches 8-5 Texas. Even Longhorns fans don't want to watch 8-5 Texas.
Well, the history of Texas football, I think when you look at Oklahoma, Texas, Oklahoma has much richer history of football. I know Texas had plenty of good teams in its past, but this isn't Alabama. We're not talking about a team that's winning 10 games and in conference contention on a regular basis. If you look at the history of UT football, it's just not like that. They got that reputation. They certainly have had some good teams in the past, but in terms of winning titles and everything, that's not exactly what the Longhorns do.
Yeah, well, I mean, so from a booster perspective, though, they're one of the big boys of college football.
Yes.
They obviously have some national champions. You go all the way back to Earl Campbell playing for Texas. So it's not as though
There's some history, but it's not as year to year as you'd think. It's a lot of up and down with them. And I know during the Royal years they were very good, but here's my question for you, Will. When you look at Texas coming over to the SEC, why, if you're Texas, are you interested in giving up that driver's seat? Is it that much? I mean, it's got to be that much more lucrative to be a part, of the SEC, making that jump before anything else starts moving, right?
Yeah, it's the same reason that I think if the SEC extended an offer to Notre Dame, they'd take it. Because at the end of the day, this is going to be a carousel. I mean, this is a game of musical chairs. And if you get left out of the big boy conferences when the musical chairs finish, then you're not going to be at the head of the table, and you're really not going to be dealing with a sport that's generating a whole lot of revenue for you anymore. And this was actually my argument against some of the stuff that Danny White was doing at UCF, is that you knew that realignment was coming at some point, and the question is going to be who gets favorable treatment. I mean, I actually think what the SEC should probably go do is just form a super conference with all the teams that have won championships before. Go get Nebraska, go get Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, go get USC, go get all these teams that have won national championships, Southern Cal, Miami, Washington, Colorado. So you don't lose any of the history, right? You have all the teams that have won the national championships. And then maybe you go to some bigger markets like Rutgers and Northwestern for Chicago. And, hey, UCLA, you already have USC, but maybe UCLA, you get Temple for Philadelphia, TCU for Dallas, and just form a conference that's 34, 35, 36 teams. Do the 14-team NFL playoff format and go with it, right? I mean, people love the NFL. If you gave me Ohio State versus Georgia Tech, Notre Dame versus UCLA, Florida State versus Nebraska on a week in, week out basis, I'm not complaining about it as long as Florida's in there. But we're not, when I say national championships, I don't mean UCF, none of those national championships. Go back to 1960, find all those teams. It does end up adding up to, I think, about 30 teams total. If you take the current SEC and then add the teams that have won national championships from these other conferences, you add a couple of big markets because you don't want to leave New York out. So Rutgers gets a seat at the table just because of where they're located. And, hey, I would watch every minute of that. And the thing is that the uniqueness of college football has always been sort of the exclusion of, that Michigan State might beat Michigan every once in a while, but Michigan is going to be the team that dominates that state. Same thing with Ohio State. They may struggle every once in a while, but at the end of the day, that's going to be the dominant team in the area. And so, hey, let's embrace that uniqueness. Let's embrace that exclusion and just exclude everybody else who hasn't won a title. And the SEC and then everybody who's won a title. Let's go, man.
You're drunk with SEC power. This is what's happening right here.
Hey, I love it. But again, you got Rutgers and Vanderbilt, so we'd still have the arguments and Kentucky, so we'd still have the arguments of who got the easy schedule and got to play Vandy. And then but again, I got to tell you, if you gave me Southern Cal, Nebraska, Clemson versus Penn State, and Michigan versus Florida, and that's like your opening weekend, and it's just that every week for 11 or 12 weeks before a 14-team playoff. Oh, yeah, I'll buy into that. Like, I don't like the 12-team playoff where, we're going to let Cincinnati in and we're going to let Green in.
That's what's funny about this news is we started the summer talking about a 12-team playoff and maybe a little more parity in college football. And then the SEC drops the hammer a month later. It's like, forget that.
Sankey said there will be no parity.
We'll take 9. We'll take 9 of those spots. Thank you very much.
I got to tell you, Sankey might knife his own mother if it got him more money the way he treated Texas A&M. So I don't know, man. The SEC clearly is the big boy here. I don't know what's going to – I suspect the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are going to kind of counter. and those are going to be the two conferences that sort of lead things forward. But college football is changing, and it's not changing towards the UCFs and the USFs and Florida Atlantics of the world being more powerful. The fact that more money is now at stake, because let's be honest, the Supreme Court rulings are going to make colleges no longer pretend they aren't a business.
Mm-hmm.
And now that they don't have to pretend they're not a business, I suspect they're probably going to break away from the universities because of Title IX. They'll still be loosely associated with them, but I don't know that they're going to be as associated with them as they have been before, just because of some of those restrictions. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't necessarily know what the ins and outs of that are. But I wonder whether they're going to be independent entities that are associated with the university, but not necessarily tied to the university.
Well, I'm fairly certain that's how it already works with Florida. The UA, I'm fairly certain. Don't quote me on this. Someone correct me if I'm wrong here, but the UAA is not officially a part of the university, and
so
it gives back a certain amount every year, a certain percentage every year. The university is tied to the university, but it's not.
Put it this way: people smarter than me are going to figure out how to maximize every dollar out of this thing. And the NCAA, to be honest, has been sort of incompetent in all of this stuff. And, it was great to hear Sankey talk about there needing to be federal NIL legislation. When I'm sitting there going, well, wait, just don't restrict people's ability to make money and we won't have any problems here. Yeah. You don't need a law. You just need to get rid of your rules. But he's throwing his weight around a little bit on these things, and he's going to win.
We'll get to NIL shortly. Last part of this subject here. This is one of the longer ones we've had, but pods. What do you think? Let's go back to that 16-team scenario that we have cooking with Texas and Oklahoma joining the league. I like the idea. I've seen. I think the SEC network put it out where they basically put it into 4 pods, and I think Florida was with Georgia, South Carolina, and Kentucky. I want to say, where you play your teams you play everybody in your pod plus 2 games against other pods, and you rotate around, and it would allow you to play every single team every 4 years on rotation, home and away, which is similar to what we were talking about, an idea like that last week that was completely unrelated to this before this news dropped. But I love the idea of the pods if that's the direction they end up going.
I mean, I guess, like, at that point, though, unless you set something up to actually determine your champion, you don't, you might play a year where you miss Texas, Oklahoma, Alabama, and Georgia, right? If they're not in your particular pod. Now, I mean, so what happens if one pod happens to be more unbalanced? I mean, I think you end up in the pod with Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, and South Carolina or something. And
they paired it off pretty well. I think it was like Florida, Georgia, LSU, A&M, Alabama, Auburn, and Oklahoma, Texas were all in the same pods in terms of the power.
It would be my concern, right? My concern would be that you'd get done with now maybe that's what they want, right? Arguments at the end. That's one of the things that sort of killed baseball, is you can't really make arguments anymore because the numbers are so clear. It's one of the things I was concerned about when they went from 2 teams to 4 teams. And then, when they talked about going from 4 to 12, is if I'm arguing about who's number 11 and who's number 12, they aren't winning the tournament anyway. So what do I care? Whereas I think in this case, if you're arguing about who the best team in the SEC is, and you've got those 16 teams, I think maybe that turns into an interesting argument. It's way too early. First, we got to get Texas and Oklahoma in the conference. Then we got to see where the dust settles in terms of everything else. And then I think what will happen is they'll design the conference to match whatever the playoff system is going to be with the way the dust settles. Now, the SEC is going to dictate how the dust is going to settle, I'm sure. But at the same time, I think that you need to have a setup in your conference that feeds into the postseason in an effective way. So if you think about what the SEC has done, they've been the leader in this for years, right? I mean, the reason that conference championship game became so successful over the years is because that extra game really did give a lot of gravitas to both the conference from a money perspective and a prestige perspective, but also from a playoff perspective, right? That the winner of that SEC title, you had people talking last year, even after Florida laid that egg against LSU, that, well, if they pull out this game against Alabama, maybe they'll get to go to the playoff. And no other conference gets that kind of respect. So I suspect that what will happen is that they will design the conference play to match the postseason play. Now, again, and they'll probably help define what that postseason play looks like. But they're not going to put pods in place until they make sure they've maximized all the teams. Now, I did tweet out earlier this week. I said, I can't wait for the playoff to expand to 16 teams because the SEC has 12 spots in 1 year. And they just decide they got to expand to 16 so we get more people in this playoff. And we're sort of moving there, man. That's my proposal. Put them all in the SEC and then just play it like the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty fired up to talk about Texas and Oklahoma tonight, but Will Miles just went ahead and Game of Thrones the entire Power Five. So I'm boring, I guess, man. Nice job on that, Will. All right, we got to move on to 4 bits. This is the longest 2 bits opener in the history of the show so far, but worth it. Big subject. All right, Eli Drinkwitz took a shot at Dan Mullen during media days this week. Gators are heading to Columbia to face Missouri. Second last week of the season, November 20th, final SEC game. Drinkwitz said, "I'm praying for snow." Dan is going to complain about everything. Basically, insinuating a little bit of a reference back to last year's moment on the field when they were going at it. Pretty heated exchange where the benches ended up clearing right before the half. Will, what'd you think about Drinkwitz's comment? And did you see Tate Casey's tweet comparing Drinkwitz to Rugrat from The Wolf of Wall Street?
I did not see Tate Casey's tweet.
That was perfect because he looks exactly like Drinkwitz. So kudos to Tate Casey for pointing that out.
So I will say that one thing is I'm not sure that Eli Drinkwitz will actually be at Missouri when that game is played. Because if you look at his biography, he basically stays everywhere for a year and then goes someplace else. So Appalachian State in 2019, we had a little bit of success. Boise State is the offensive coordinator in 2005. I've had a little bit of success. So we'll see whether he's still there. The other thing is okay, so look, I thought Mullen acted in a way that was unbecoming of a head coach going out there and getting all emotional during the fight. And then certainly the Darth Vader afterwards was interesting. And I know there were a lot of Florida fans, particularly some older Florida fans, I think, who didn't like that very much either. But we gotta talk about the reason that whole thing happened is because one of Drinkwitz's guys took a cheap shot and just drilled Trask way after the whistle, way after he'd released the ball. And so your guy was dirty and you're getting mad at our coach for talking. Like, maybe don't have your guys be dirty in a game that you're way behind in, and then we won't have anything to talk about here. I mean, I don't really care. I mean, it's freaking Missouri. We're not going to lose to Missouri. But it's like for the guy to get up there, start taking shots at Mullen. I just think it's hilarious. I'm like, dude, you're the one who started it. Mullen finished it, and you're mad that he finished it. I hope he puts up 60 on him this year. I think that
I like having beef with Mizzou. I like it. Give me a reason to care about that game. Give me a reason to care about the Mizzou game. I'm good with it. Like, I'm with you. Let's Mullen go up and try to throw up 60 on him and see how it goes. I mean, it wasn't close this year. We know that.
Well, I mean, the only reason Missouri ever beats Florida up there is because it's like an 11 a.m. time. It's an 11 a.m. local time start. Florida doesn't want to be there. It's like 38 degrees, and those guys have never played when it's below 70. And, they're out there playing. It's always a slow start. It's always a slog, and you're always sitting there going, oh, God, I hope they don't win. And certainly, Missouri had some success, not under Drinkwitz, but Missouri had some success against Florida when Florida was down. Florida ain't down anymore. I mean, Florida may have its flaws, and Florida may not be the best team in the SEC. They're a heck of a lot better than Mizzou. So if Drinkwitz wants to pick on teams, he ought to pick on teams that have similar talent levels and records. So go pick on Kentucky or something.
It would be a nice tune-up for Florida State this year. All right, let's move on to 6 bits. The Gators picked to finish second in the SEC East by the media this week. Obviously, Georgia's pick to finish first. Seeing a little bit, I saw Gator Dave even tweeting about it. There's a little bit of love for Kentucky out there too, but the Gators do ultimately get that second spot from the media. I really put this under the category of who cares a little bit in terms of actual meaning to anything, but something to look at. Preseason expectations are definitely fully on Georgia to bounce back this year and get back to Atlanta over Florida.
I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, you see the last four games with JT Daniels played pretty well. His QB rating was up over 170. I think you can argue about sample size, you can argue about quality of the opponent, but I still think it says that the sample size is, especially with his year at USC, the sample size for JT Daniels is now significantly larger than the sample size for Emory Jones. And Jones is a decorated recruit in his own right, but he doesn't have the recruiting pedigree of Daniels. So you look at that and go, okay, at the quarterback position, Georgia probably has an advantage at least coming into the year, and we'll see how Daniels plays because he's also a statue back there and gets sacked an awful lot. But that's all before you get to the defense. So you can say a lot about Kirby Smart and his limitations as a coach, and we certainly have, and we've laughed at it quite a bit. But his defenses in his 5 years have been 35th, 7th, 29th, 2nd, and 9th in opponent's yards per play allowed. So they're going to have a top 35 defense, likely a top 25 defense, and 3 of the 5 years he's had a top 10 defense there at Georgia. Just like we trust Mullen to have a good offense, regardless of who the personnel is in there, I think you can say the same thing about Kirby on the defensive side of the ball. Now, that doesn't mean that he's going to, set the world on fire on the offensive side of the ball, but that what that means is if JT Daniels and Emory Jones are a dead heat, like let's say they're both really good, Georgia probably still has an advantage. So I get why the SEC media chose Georgia to win. I've actually got an article coming out this week, hopefully, on JT Daniels and some of the stuff that I've seen in terms of statistics there with him and some reasons why maybe Florida should be worried. But the other thing is that there aren't any excuses for Kirby anymore, right? I mean, at this point, if JT Daniels plays well and they still choke against the South Carolina, or still can't get over the hump against Alabama, or still end up losing to Florida because they can't cover a wheel route. I mean, at some point, you look at it and go, this seems an awful lot like a guy who used to coach here named Mark Richt. And, so the heat gets dialed up on Mullen because of some of his antics and some of his recruiting failures. But certainly I don't think we worry too much about once the game day hits that the team's going to be ready to go and going to be able to put more than some of its parts out there on the field. I think that's really where the doubt is with Kirby. And that's why people don't just say, oh, yeah, Georgia will win, right? Because nobody at Auburn is going, oh, the SEC media picked Alabama. Why would they do that? It's like, no. We understand why they pick Alabama. We hope Alabama doesn't win again, but we completely understand. They're not at that point at Georgia yet because of Kirby Smart.
Yeah, you really can't question Kirby's ability to coach a defense. I mean, he did hold Mullen under 50 last year, so I give him a lot of credit there. But I saw an interesting vote. One first place vote for South Carolina. What's that guy? What's going through that guy's mind?
It's Shane Beamer's high school roommate or something is in the SEC media. I don't know. I mean, look, I actually think Beamer is going to do a better job than Muschamp. My alma mater,
bringing a little offense back to Columbia.
Well, my alma mater is Virginia Tech. I think Frank Beamer did a really nice job there. So certainly Shane knows what he's getting into in terms of being a head coach, in terms of being in an environment where your team is going to be overmatched. And so I expect that one of the things he's going to do is take the stuff that Frank Beamer did at Virginia Tech to build that program up and really emphasize that. So I think you're going to see a lot of emphasis on special teams. I think you're going to see a lot of emphasis on trying to get big time turnovers. I think you're going to see a lot of emphasis on aggressive ball hawking defense where they're out there trying to make big plays to turn the game around. And I think you're also going to see a lot of losses in the first couple of years while, the turnover from the Will Muschamp, we're going to, 3 yards in a cloud of dust into a team that chucks the ball around a little bit. There's going to be some growing pains as that happens. Anybody picking South Carolina to win the East is they are energetically from, I warrant to say they are probably from Columbia. That would be my guess.
Big Luke Doty fan, I suppose. I don't know, man. I'm not seeing it for winning the East. Maybe they pull an interesting upset here or there, but I'm like you. I'm optimistic about Beamer. I'm looking forward to that. Not on my radar this year in terms of winning the East, though. No. Can't say I'm looking to Columbia for SEC East championship this season, but
plus he's just copying the photos at Arby's of the head ball coach. That doesn't work, man. You can't riff off a Spur. You got to come up with your own shtick.
I did like the players in the background, though. Did you see that where they were sitting? Like they even posed like the people that were in the background of the Spurrier photo, the 2 players that came to the SEC media days with him.
Well, at least they're having fun with it, because if McElwain had done something like that, the players would have been rolling their eyes in the back.
He'd probably been yelling, "It's not me. That's not me in that photo." We know McElwain doesn't own up to photos. That's a whole different story.
They would have taken him to SeaWorld.
Yeah. Let's move on to $1. Little NIL chatter at media days this week. A couple of interesting things I heard, Will. Dan Mullen, he referred to the NIL as a learning process, which absolutely couldn't agree more. You go up and down the thing, you get asked a billion questions on it. I think it's going to be ever evolving still. Nick Saban says it says their quarterback's already made close to 7 figures, which I found to be about normal for an Alabama quarterback on any given year. And really, the best quote I pulled out from media days came out of the ACC. Clemson starter DJ Uiagalelei. He throws out there. He's talking about he's going. Oh, I'm definitely going to take care of my offensive line with the Bojangles biscuits. What I've learned about living in the South, and he's a California boy, moving down to Clemson, South Carolina here. So what I've learned about living in the South is Jesus is number one here, then football and Bojangles. So Jesus, football, Bojangles. Welcome to the age of NIL, Will.
I was gonna say, was that like a was that like an advertising strategy where he's looking to recruit Bojangles, or did Bojangles pay him to put that in the actual tweet that he put out there? But
I'm not sure what Jesus's commission is on being a part of the advertising for Bojangles, but it might be something steep. I don't know.
I don't know. So there's a couple things there. One is Saban said his quarterback was almost at 7 figures, and almost at 7 figures can be well. So a Dodge Charger's like 80 grand. So it wasn't a big jump. You give him 2 Chargers and a couple other things, and you're getting pretty close. The other thing is close 500 grand, is close 700 grand, is close 900 grand. You don't really know. I suspect this is a little bit of an exaggeration by Saban because it looks good to say I've got players here who are making real money. But players are going to start to make real money, especially the stars. But that, again, I don't think that was ever in doubt that the star players were underpaid. I think the question is the second string left tackle overpaid with a scholarship? And are we going to find out over time that this is actually sort of harmful, or not harmful, but that it was more of a socialist system when you were giving scholarships to everybody. And now that we've opened it up to something that's more capitalist, hey, yeah, the high end guys are going to get rewarded, but the guys who are sort of on the tail end are going to get taken advantage of a little bit. But so Saban, this is where the part for Mullen bugs me. All right, you saw me sort of react when you said that Mullen called it a learning process. I would be much, much happier if he would call it a differentiator or an opportunity or something like that. Calling it a learning process suggests that you don't know how to take advantage of it. And so you're not going to use it to differentiate your program, and you're not going to use it to make sure that you've got a better recruiting class than you had before NIL was in place. And before NIL, look, I mean, we all know that different programs were dirtier than others. We're making Charger jokes here right now. So it's not necessarily something where guys weren't getting paid. It's just now the stuff is above board. And so for a program like Florida that really prides itself on doing things the right way, now you can argue about whether that's always been the case, but for a program that did not like the fact that he got them on probation for some of his recruiting out on the West Coast a couple of years ago, this is an opportunity to do stuff above board and creatively and help make revenue and help brand players and all that sort of stuff. And that's what Saban just did. He got up at that podium and he said, I got a guy who's making $1 million coming to play quarterback for me. Every quarterback every 5-star quarterback just went, maybe Alabama's the right place to go, right? Maybe they don't all end up there, but everybody looked at it. And so I think this is sort of indicative of the reason why Saban's already a good recruiter, is the sales pitch is solid, right? And so calling it a learning process, I don't like it. Like, use it to differentiate. Don't be honest. Set up your players for success. Bring the eyeballs. Say Emory Jones is making, Emory Jones is making 600 grand this year, hawking cars at the local Toyota. I don't know. Do something to make it clear that Florida is fully invested in making people successful with the NIL, rather than, well, there's a lot of complicating things here. We got to sort of wait to see where the dust settles. That's how you end up like Oklahoma State, with Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12. You sit there and go, well, let's just be patient and see how this stuff works out. Nah, be like Sankey. Go for the throat. Knife Texas A&M in the back. That's what you got to do with the NIL.
Do you think that comes from a place of where he just got busted with some recruiting violations, that he's being super careful about what he says because of the tone? Maybe from people within the athletic department are saying. Maybe Florida is being conservative in general, and they're putting some handcuffs on Mullen.
I guess, but you don't have to tell everybody you're being conservative. Like tell
That's true.
everybody you're being aggressive and then follow the rules.
I'll give you that.
Like
I'll
the,
give
you
you
know,
that.
there's a perception, and I say, and this is sort of the people have asked me all the time, why do I think Florida struggles with recruiting or has struggled with recruiting under Mullen? And again, like the recruits aren't terrible, right? Florida still has a lot of good players.
Mhm.
They just don't have the degree of top level talent that Alabama, Georgia, and even LSU have in their own conference. And the thing I always say is you go back and you read Urban Meyer's book with Buddy Martin, and Urban basically said he had to keep the recruits away from Mullen. He said it specifically about Tebow. That Tebow almost didn't come to Florida because of Mullen, which says something about the way he builds relationships and the way he sells. Now, what I will say is that Tebow and Mullen are like the closest of friends now, right? I mean,
Right.
Mullen's at his wedding, and so he is able to build those relationships over time, but not apparently during the recruiting cycles. And I think part of it is it sounds like he's just honest about it, right? Yeah, well, we're still figuring this out. There's complications with it. Nobody wants to hear that. They want to hear, yeah, I'm going to make you money. Bring me here and I'm going to make you successful in the classroom. I'm going to make you successful in the NFL. And hey, by the way, Allstate's going to sponsor you when you come here too. I mean, that's the pitch. I mean, the pitch at this point,
you're in good hands with Dan Mullen.
They should have. I mean, here's the deal, right? Social media could have, instead of having guys put out like requests for T-shirts on social media for people to buy T-shirts, Florida could have proactively like set these guys up with brand ambassadors or something where you're like out there pushing them for different things, right? They do this every year with like different programs do this every year with Heisman type campaigns. And it was actually really confusing last year that Florida didn't do that with Trask at all. Right. I mean, it wasn't until like all the votes were in that Mullen's like, yeah, I think he should win the Heisman. And we're all sitting here going, why isn't he saying anything like during the Kentucky game and during the Tennessee game? Like, where is the push? And I get it. You want to keep the team together and you want to make sure that no one guy's better than or bigger than the team and all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, that's not the landscape of college football anymore. The landscape is, yeah, the quarterback is bigger than the team because the Alabama quarterback's making $1 million a year. He's going to need to buy some nice watches for his offensive line. But at the end of the day, like that quarterback is who drives eyeballs. That quarterback is who drives wins. And so you got to get that guy in there.
So Will Miles has become, I mean, we started with the Game of Thrones references with the SEC taking over all the Power Five. And now he's saying you got to use be a little bit more less honest there, Dan Mullen, to get better recruits, right?
So I didn't say lie. I said
I didn't say lie. I said
omit
a little less honest. So Will Miles turning into Machiavelli here before our eyes. Here we got.
Hey, I'm learning from the SEC. The SEC decided they were going to just absolutely shank Texas A&M, and I think if you're willing to do that from a conference perspective, you need to be willing to do that from a recruiting perspective as well.
Well, hey, Will, we're getting close. Next week's episode is officially going to be in August. I can smell football around the corner, man. Looking forward to diving into this over football season. Thank you for joining us tonight, everybody. And please continue to subscribe and support us. And we're over on Patreon as well. We're going to send it out to a little overtime bonus episode for you guys. Get a little taste of the bonus episodes we're posting over on Patreon. Thanks again for the support. And go Gators. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On this week's bonus episode, we are going to discuss how Texas and Oklahoma will perform on the field as members of the SEC. Will, we talked about the expansion in our regular Stand Up and Holler episode this week, but this is such a big story. There's plenty to discuss here, plenty to break down. Texas has struggled as a program since the days, really, I mean, even the end of the Mac Brown era. They felt like Mac was washed up and it was time to move on. Probably loving what's going on at North Carolina these days. And Oklahoma has just been cooking for about 6-7 years right now. And the Lincoln Riley era has been fantastic. As an SEC fan, I would definitely have more concern about Oklahoma coming to the conference with their football program than Texas right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Let's be honest. When I look at Texas and Oklahoma, I go, okay, how does this impact Florida? And one
Right.
good thing is that these are teams that are in the West, and so they're not going to end up in Florida's pod or Florida's conference. They're not going to go in the SEC East, right? It would be
But will it kick in Alabama over to the East?
well,
I saw
maybe.
that. I saw that in this scenario.
Maybe I think it's more likely to kick Auburn to the East because Auburn has some natural rivals with Florida and Tennessee and Georgia that makes sense to have Auburn over to the East as opposed to Alabama. But the big thing is Georgia and Alabama are the behemoths in the conference because of their recruiting prowess, right? Because Kirby Smart and Nick Saban bring in the best recruits in the country, and so the best recruits in the SEC as well. That's not true of Oklahoma and Texas. So Oklahoma, they have an average national recruiting ranking of 9.25 over the last 4 years. Texas is at 7.25. If you look at the rest of the SEC,
That's with the struggling program, by the way.
it is, but at the same time, it's also with Tom Herman coming in and really sort of boosting their average compared to where it was with Charlie Strong before. That compares to 6.75 over the last 4 years for LSU, 11 for Florida, and 12.25 for Auburn. So this is not South Carolina. This is not Kentucky that they're adding, right? But it's also not Alabama. All right, Alabama and Georgia at a recruiting level, at least, are significantly superior to Oklahoma and Texas. Now, the question you ask is, does moving to the SEC give them an SEC boost when it comes to
like we
recruiting?
saw with Texas A&M?
Sure, but the A&M boost, I don't think. I mean, that had more to do with the fact that Jimbo, and it had to do with Sumlin, right? I mean, Sumlin, for all of his issues that he had on the field, was a pretty good recruiter there at Texas A&M, and he was a good recruiter before he came to Texas A&M as well. I think the thing that you need to look at, though, is that even if you think that Oklahoma and Texas are essentially LSU, that's still kind of an issue because Dan Mullen's 1-2 against LSU in his time at Florida thus far. And typically teams that are ranked 11th through 20th in the recruiting rankings only beat more talented teams 34% of the time. So 1-3, right? So the fact that Mullen's 1-2 against LSU is exactly what we should expect against a team with LSU's talent profile.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel, join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.